Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and today I'm in London visiting one of the most exciting names in bespoke shoemaking, Canons. For those that are unaware, Canons is in fact the new name of the Foster & Son Bespoke Workshop, and therefore steeped in heritage and history. Canons refers to the purely bespoke side of the business, while Foster & Son continues to produce ready-to-wear footwear, shoe care, and leather goods. So join me as I step inside the Canons Bespoke Workshop and meet with Bespoke lastmaker and owner Simon Bolzoni. Simon.
Kirby.
How are you?
Very well, thanks. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me out. And wow, the new workshop is fabulous. This
Thank you so
amazing.
much. It's a nice day for it as well.
Yeah,
So
beautiful day here in London, which is rare.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, come in.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, wow, Simon's amazing. I can't believe you were able to fit all these lasts in here, but what an incredible backdrop.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it took a while to get them hanging.
Really?
Again. Yeah, it took us about 10 days.
How many are there in here?
Just over 2,000.
Okay.
And we have about roughly 3,000 more, which off-site.
No kidding.
Yeah, just, I mean, obviously couldn't fit them all in.
Yeah.
But these ones are active, so.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, Canons is a new name, but the firm and the firm's legacy and tradition is one familiar to many, and that is the continuation of Foster & Sons. What the genesis was for the change to Canons.
Yeah, we've been in and around St James's for the most of the history of the business. We'd moved into the store on Jermyn Street around 1964, something like this, and that had been on a long lease, and just so happened that ran out. So we'd already been sort of looking around and trying to sort of like figure out what the best decision was, whether to stay and when COVID happened, it literally the lease ran out the next month. So it changed maybe a bit of our perspective on what we needed.
In some ways, it was the perfect opportunity to kind of catalyze that move. Yeah. And then the decision was made to move out here and I guess focus exclusively on bespoke?
We're a bespoke shoemaker. We've been a bespoke shoemaker since 1840.
Yeah.
But in the 1960s, when we moved into the Jermyn Street location, we started selling ready-to-wear shoes. So the shop below the workshop was predominantly for that purpose. When COVID happened and we were in lockdown, we decided to move away from ready-to-wear, whether that was going to be temporary or not. And so we just didn't need a shop front, really. Yeah. And so we just wanted to refocus on what we're good at, what we specialise in, which is bespoke shoes.
Yeah, and that is the firm's legacy, really, is as bespoke shoemakers. I mean, Foster & Sons, almost 200 years old, has always been a very well-established and very highly respected West End bespoke shoemaking firm.
Yeah, West End shoemakers, it's like a historical group of firms, essentially. Many of them aren't around anymore, but Foster's is one of the remaining firms that was part of that West End shoemaking scene. What comes with that is a certain style, and that's sort of, I guess, influenced by the location, it being in Mayfair, and over maybe 100 years or so, when people come into London, most of them stayed in around the club area in St James's. It was a natural sort of place for shoemakers and tailors and shirt makers to locate. And the style, I guess, reflects the sort of type of clients that the firms had. So each firm has a slightly different version of West End style. Foster's had its own version.
Yeah.
It was kind of heavily influenced, I guess, by the lastmaker, Terry Moore.
Yeah. With whom you trained, right?
That's correct, yes. Quite an understated style and elegant, but not...
Overly fashionable.
Yeah, not too sporty, quite timeless.
Yeah.
So our samples go back just over 100 years. And you can't quite pinpoint which decade some of the samples were made in.
Yeah.
The only giveaway sometimes is just the sock, which is the bit of leather inside the shoe, has our different addresses over all those decades.
Okay.
So you know when it's post-1960s because it says 83 German Street.
Yeah.
Ones before were like maybe the 30s, 20s. But if you took the sock out, sometimes you can't really tell what decade they were made in. And I think that's really kind of like the signature of Foster's, really, is that sort of timelessness and understated style. And that's what we're carrying forward.
And so in moving over here and refocusing on Bespoke, right, I guess, the change of the name was an opportunity to also refocus kind of the branding of the company as, now, although still very much continuing that historical legacy of Foster and Sons, this really being kind of a new, page in the story, where you're focusing exclusively on Bespoke and really in that historic tradition and the authentic way that it's been practiced.
When we sort of decided to go back to just being purely a bespoke business, we've already been spending some years, sort of the last 6-7 years, sort of really trying to refine the work we're doing. The name change sort of like almost allowed us a little bit of an opportunity to sort of like clear away some of the sort of dust and sort of like really settle into what we've already started doing. It was just a really good opportunity, essentially, to do that.
And I mean, we spoke a little bit about West End style, but Foster and Sons have a pair of shoes from the old Foster and Sons, right? Which you were around and involved in, which I love. I mean, a beautiful mid-brown semi-brogue. I mean, one of my most comfortable pairs of shoes.
Oh, good.
And then recently, I had this pair made, and I absolutely love them. I mean, they're amongst the most beautiful, well-executed pair of bespoke shoes I own. How would you describe your approach now? I mean, now that you've got this new chapter, you've got this new name, you've got this incredible legacy of lasts and samples to draw from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How is it that, you see Canons moving forward and your commitment to bespoke shoemaking?
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate because we have over 100 years of samples and covers so many different styles and toe shapes. And then obviously we've got our last archive. We kind of wanted to distill all the best elements of all of those samples. And sometimes you can just take little tiny details from one and add it to another one. But it's important to make it coherent so that and consistent so that every customer gets something that suits them. So we're kind of making their version of like our style that we've been doing for almost 200 years. And
a commitment to, in some ways, the craft and the finesse of those finer details of bespoke shoemaking, because, even if you look at the fudging, the edges, the outsole finishing, on these shoes that I'm wearing, all of it is perfectly executed in the most traditional manner. We've spent quite a few years now just in making sure that all the consistency of all the shoes we're making is the same and as high as possible. There's a lot of competition in this sort of industry, even though it's quite small. And over the years, I think the competition came from maybe more the Japanese market and those makers. From our perspective, we think English shoemaking and London shoemaking specifically is a world-class example of shoes. So we're kind of almost we're kind of stepping forward a bit out of a period which maybe was where it lost its way slightly. And so, analysing all of the styles we have and the finishes, and we kind of really do stay really true to the historical samples we have. We don't really branch out too far outside of that. The things we're changing more are actually more about sometimes the techniques, and we're trying to innovate behind the scenes in how things are done. If we think there can be an improvement to any part of the process, we're making that improvement, or we have made that improvement. Yeah. And those now are kind of house secrets, really, that we created for ourselves. So we don't, we're quite sort of, this business and this firm has always been quite sort of
discreet.
Quite discreet and quite private. And so we haven't really ever done interviews or anything like that. We don't really advertise or market ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're not innovating in the background. And I guess that's why people come to us who know us.
Well, I think in some ways, almost more importantly, you still are innovating in the background.
Yeah, right.
Because it's easy to, in some ways, perhaps be burdened by one's historical legacy as opposed to allowing that to be something on top of which you build and continue to innovate.
Yeah, exactly. The DNA of the business is like a historical business, with just the continuation of that. And it's had influences come into it. Some influences like Peel & Co., where Terry came from. Over the years, there's been sort of different sort of like flavours, I guess, of influence that come into it. From my perspective as the lastmaker, I'm sort of very much focused on fit, comfort, and the style of the shoes that we're delivering. My job doesn't really stop there. I have to kind of lead the shoe through its journey, through all of our outwork, and just sort of choreographing that essentially as part of it. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful workshop. So I mean, imagine that anyone that's in London can still come see you. In London, you're not on Jermyn Street anymore, but you're not far from Jermyn Street, and this is really just such a beautiful example of kind of shoemaking splendor with all the lasts and the tools. But speak to a little bit about how the team is organized.
Well, I'm the lastmaker, so I take all the measurements. The clients usually come, if they come to the workshop here, they'll sit down here, we'll take a draft of their feet, and otherwise it'll be on a trunk show. Sometimes we go on location to their private properties. When it comes to doing the lastmaking, I have the book here, and my bench is obviously right here. And then I make the last, carve it by hand out of beechwood, which takes a few days, essentially.
And that's, again, traditionally practiced as it always been.
Yeah, we've got a bench knife. The bench is ancient, and the knife, you wouldn't be able to have one of those made anymore. So we use that for some parts of the process. Mostly it's with rasps and files and then eventually sandpaper. So it's a process of you take a bit of remove some of the wood, you sort of check the measurements, you keep checking. Every firm has a different sort of version of last making and also a different version of how they measure people's feet in the first place. So ours, we focus on fit predominantly. We focus quite a lot on the bottom of the last, and we build up from that to get the fit right. And so that's the foundation of the fit, essentially. And so when we're getting those measurements into the wood, it's correct from that point. And then the styling of it is obviously whatever we discuss with the client.
Yeah, and that would be toe shape and otherwise the aesthetic.
Yeah, some people's foot types are mostly genetic. So some people's foot types just aren't going to work with certain toe shapes. The way around it is you can just end up making the last forever longer and longer and longer. But that wouldn't really fit with our house style and what we're trying to do. So we're trying to sort of work around what the client, their foot type is, and then try to sort of give them something that sort of suits that foot type rather than try to force a shape onto it.
Yeah, because it's really interesting in bespoke shoemaking. I mean, you have you have the objective of making a beautiful shoe, with that of making a well-fitting and comfortable pair of shoes, and oftentimes those are. There's a creative tension there.
Absolutely.
Where you can make a beautiful pair of shoes that fits terrible and is not comfortable, or you can make an absolutely, comfortable pair of shoes, that doesn't look elegant or beautiful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the thing that sort of dictates what the shape of the foot, the shape of the last, and then eventually the shoe's going to look like, is mostly the heel to ball sort of position and the position of the metatarsals, and that's basically genetic. So it depends where you're from, and so that angle that happens with those metatarsal bones sort of dictate where the toes sit, and then that dictates what sort of toe shape you can have. So we have to always work around that. If you cut off the toes because you want a sharper shape, then it's going to start hurting at some point.
Well, once the last is created, then where does it go next, kind of in the journey?
So once the last is done, it goes to the pattern gets made. So the last gets taped up. There's a couple of ways of doing pattern making. One is paper pattern, and the other one is taping up the last, and that's the method we use here. Once that's done, then we make a sort of a flat pattern, and then click the lever. and then that gets made into a bundle, what's called a bundle, and given to one of our closers.
Okay.
So it's an outworker system.
Yeah, and so you're sending the shoes out to be made.
It's an outworker system, and so the rest of the team has been trained by us. They work in their own workshops or at home. So once it gets to that stage, the shoes come in and out of the workshop, and we check at the different stages.
Yeah.
So it goes to the closer, comes back, we check it, and then we send it out to whichever one of our particular makers we think is the correct one for that particular shoe.
The bottom maker that would actually
bottom
then...
maker, yeah, exactly. The finishing's all done here. So we actually colour all our levers ourselves. So we're not at the mercy of like the colours that are given to us by the tanneries. And also we're no longer really keen on the finishes that we get that sometimes can be a bit floating and create sort of like sort of creases that we don't particularly like. So we changed really the type of level we use about 3 or 4 years ago now, I guess.
Okay.
And so we do all that finishing here. That takes actually quite a long time.
So you changed the leather?
Yeah, so we changed the type of level we use, and we always struggled, basically. Everyone wanted to have a particular colour that the samples were in.
Yeah.
The samples are like 100 years old,
Yeah.
so we can't go to a tannery and ask for that particular colour. And also they sort of have character, which is done by the sunlight, essentially, over the years. So we developed a new way of doing the colouring in here, which is not antiquing as such, but we actually colour the leather ourselves using dyes.
Okay.
And we have a sort of a method that we use, which is all timed, and it's all like we have it all written down exactly which type of finish level of colour we use.
Okay.
And it takes some hours. We have to completely tape up the shoe before it's done.
So it's done after the shoe's made?
Yeah, it's done after the shoe's made, yeah. And so it's particular for every single shoe gets coloured individually to a different method.
Yeah.
And then it's finished with wax and cream.
Cream,
Yeah. Let's go and have a look at some of the samples we've made, some of the new shoes we've got coming through as well.
That'd be great. Beautiful samples.
Thanks.
I guess talk to me about these, because it seems like this illustrates the full spectrum of what's possible via Bespoke.
We're quite lucky because these are the shoes we've finished for customers just this week.
Okay.
And it really is a broad spectrum of styles. And from Scottish ceremonial shoe here with sterling silver plate on the front, which we had made, custom made, all the way through to like a motorcycle boot, like an engineer's style boot. Which
this is in waxed calf?
That's in waxed calf, exactly, yeah. So it's made a bit similar, in a similar way to a Wellington boot.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, this really is, and there's a casual here, which is quite an unusual style.
Yeah.
It's from an old sample we have.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess this also illustrates the difference in toe shapes.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
We've got a beautiful...
So there's a sort of classic round toe, and here is a kind of a wide square. It's much softer than like a sharp chisel toe that you see sometimes. It's pretty subtle, but it's an elegant style.
Yeah.
And worn with like a nice pair of tailored trousers. Looks like really smart.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean we never really do like the sharper shapes. That's not really part of our house style.
Yeah.
So it's more of a soft square or soft chisel.
Yeah. Gigantic shoe in the background. I mean, I guess this again illustrates.
Yes.
One of the virtues of Bespoke is, it looks huge.
Yeah, this is like I guess it'd be around a size 12. So we just actually finished a size 15, which went out about a few days ago.
Okay.
But this is also a pretty big shoe.
So someone like this would be someone that, I guess, traditionally would never be able to find such a beautiful pair of shoes ready to wear.
Yeah, at this stage you start to struggle, and especially like a loafer. There's so many things at play to get the loafer to fit. And in particular, there's quite a lot of difference at the back of the shoe for this gentleman, just to get this top line to stay quite tight.
Really?
Yeah, because the gate actually leans out in the same way. Usually people either go outwards or inwards like this, but in this case it goes in the same direction. And so that sort of like changes how the last shape needs to be, and also how the pattern needs to be cut from that, just to keep that top line nice and tight. So yeah, that's when fittings come into their own. You can get that straight off without a fitting. And this, on top of that, we've made this in a vintage Freudenberg calf, which is a tannery that was around until the late 90s. They were quite renowned for the sort of smoothness of their calf, and this particular one is the orthopedic level, so it's even finer grain. What makes people like this is just the uniform colour. So it has this sort of like, very sort of solid colour.
Is this a shoe that's ready to be finished?
Yeah, so this is basically the stage we get to when we want to try the shoe on. So it still has the last and we haven't slipped it, but we make it to this stage because we want to check how the fit is.
So you're doing trial shoes?
Yeah, we make them as if it's going to be the finished shoe. So it's cut with the leather, exactly the same leather that the finished shoe is going to be cut in. But if any alterations need to be made to this, we won't ever stretch a shoe. We always recut. We do our last alteration, then we do a pattern alteration, and we recut. So, this quite possibly will just get thrown away.
So if it fit well and you were happy with it, you could then continue it to finish.
Correct, yeah.
But if you weren't unhappy, or if you weren't happy with it, then you wouldn't stretch it. You would just completely scrap it and then start over with a new pattern.
Precisely.
And new clicking.
We cement it. We used to welt them. If you welt a shoe and then you have to make it bigger, then you guaranteed that the shoemaker or whoever it is that's making it bigger, if it's the same upper, is stretched that shoe. There's no other way of changing it because it's been welted. If you cement it at this stage, then if we have to make this fractionally bigger, a small amount, then we can alter the last and if it doesn't change how the pattern sits, then we can just put it into welds afterwards or make the shoe through. So it gives us that option. But as soon as you welted a shoe and you did a try on and it had to be made bigger in some way, then the shoe's going to get stretched.
Well, I'd love to commission another pair, right? Sure. I mean, I love the shoes that I have, but I don't have any bespoke Darbys. And one of the things I've always loved about Foster's is this particular 3-eyelet Darby model, right, where it's got this kind of sharp line here and then a nice
strong
kind
cutaway,
of cutaway here. But there's another model that I saw on Instagram that instead of having two parallel lines right next to one another, has a little bit more of maybe a 1/4 of an inch.
I can show you the sample. It's this one here. So this one would be a bit more what you're talking about. So this shoe is probably from maybe the 1920s or 30s. It's a very old sample of ours. So
Really see that?
Yeah. So but it still looks good today, and would definitely suit you. I think that even that actual toe shape would be quite nice.
Is the toe shape the same between the two of these, or would you say that those are different?
This is slightly different. This has a slightly sort of like squarer. This is slightly more classic round, but both work. Yeah, absolutely.
What color would you recommend?
Maybe like an oak, something like that. Something that was like
slightly lighter than this?
A bit lighter than the one we've just made for you. But yeah, a bit lighter than this. Would work really well. It would work with loads of different colours. Something quite neutral, so you can wear it with like blues and greys and things like that. Yeah.
And would the last be different in terms of a Derby versus the lace-up Oxfords that I have?
Sometimes, yeah. It depends. Like we usually make a last for most different shoe types. A Derby and an Oxford can be made on the same last, but the Derby will highlight if the weight distribution is incorrect more so than Oxford. So. And what happens then is the facings slightly go off centre and they twist a little bit, and so it'll really be quite obvious in a style like this if that happens. So we'd want to do a fitting just to check the pattern, check the last, and make sure that distribution of weight on the instep is correct, and if the opening is sort of like parallel. But otherwise, yes. An Oxford and Derby usually can be made on the same thing, unless there's a different toe shape. It would be really good to measure you again. It's been some time, and also just to make sure that if we're doing alterations or we make a new last, we have those current measurements to do that.
And then, how long is the process then? From measurements to finish?
So currently, we usually the whole process at the moment for a new pair of shoes that has a fitting is around 9 to 10 months.
Okay.
It's slightly different if it's customers that are in the US. We try to sort of do it on the next trip, do a fitting. But generally speaking, it usually ends up at the moment being about 9 to 10 months. Yeah.
And your U.S. trunk shows are what, every 4 months, 6
Every
months?
3 months.
Every 3 months?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's quite a quick turnaround for those. So usually after measuring, if it's going to be a shoe that has to have a fitting, it's roughly around 6 months after we've measured someone, we'd do a fitting.
Yeah.
And with the exception sometimes of the US trip,
Yeah.
sometimes we can get those through a bit quicker.
But one of the things that's great about bespoke shoes is, there's certainly an investment in time on the front end of this process. But once you arrive to a last that, is comfortable and fits well, then you're able to go straight to finish. Unlike maybe, say, bespoke suiting, where every single garment has to go through multiple fittings.
Yeah, that's usually the case. So if you have the same shoe, so if you have, like you said, an Oxford, then unless you change the toe shape, we probably wouldn't have a fitting. But if you change style, we usually have to make a different last.
So like an example would be from an Oxford to, say, a Derby, or a Derby to a casual.
Yeah, or a side elastic now we make a different last for. We make a different last for Chelsea boots.
Okay.
So we really don't sort of like cut corners in that side of the process.
Well, great. Well, let's have some measurements done.
First things first.
These are your shoes, so we can admire at those.
Have a quick look at what's going on. You start with one and get the shape in, and all the design of the shape of the shoe into the first last.
And what's that? How does that inform your last making?
I'm turning this from 2 dimensions in my head into 3 dimensions.